Did you know that Catherine of Braganza brought tea with her from Portugal when she came here to marry King Charles II in the 1600s? Portuguese traders had discovered it in the Far East, and its exoticism and high prices made it very popular amongst the aristocratic circles. Now, tea was served in the coffee houses, where women were not allowed to go. But soon the coffee houses had the idea of selling leaf tea to take home, and soon the great tea-drinking revolution of Britain began. Tea spread all over the country, and it was served in the most opulent of houses to the poorest of dwellings. Lords, ladies, servants, sailors and farmers enjoyed a cup of tea. I even heard a gentleman from Nottingham say that even an old washerwoman feels she has not had a proper breakfast until she has had a cup of tea and a slice of hot buttered white bread. Now, most of the tea, all of the tea we get here today comes from China, and it is brought over by the East India Company, who have the monopoly on trade. I should add that tea is so very expensive because of the exorbitant taxes that are placed on it, but more of that in a moment. Now, when the ships are on their way back from China, the sailors are quite often given a little space on board ship to buy items for private enterprise, and most of them choose tea. You see, it's light and it's easy to transport. It comes in things like this, the tea knot, or more often than not, in the tea brick. But they do not sell it legally. No. As the ship comes closer to the coastal area, they are met by smugglers' boats, and the tea is offloaded, hidden under oilskins and rowed to shore. Now, we often think of smugglers, don't we, as being involved with rum and alcohol, lace and silk, but actually it is tea that is their most lucrative item. And because they sell it without the tax being added onto it, it has meant that tea drinking has spread all over the country. Smugglers can be cruel and barbaric people, but many of us are prepared to overlook that in order to get our favourite drink. Why then, you may ask, would you bother buying the proper tea at all if the smuggler's tea is so cheap? Well, the answer, my dear friends, is taste. Imagine, if you will, the tea has been transported all the way from China in someone's personal cubbyhole. Then it is thrown onto a boat and covered with an oilskin if the salt water does not seep in there first. Then it is taken out, thrown into sacks and put on horses' backs to be brought inland. So imagine, if you will, a cup of tea that tastes of oilskin, salt and horse sweat. Then you can imagine why some of us who can afford it prefer to drink proper tea. The real stuff is sold at East India House, and it is sold at the London Tea Auction by candle. This means a candle is lit at the beginning of each lot. Once a candle has burned down an inch, the hammer falls and the auction ends. This is to stop the price of tea being driven artificially too high. The taxes on tea, as I've mentioned, have been exorbitant for the last few years, set at 119%. This has been to pay for various wars with Spain. But eventually our good Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger, has brought in the Commutation Act, and that has slashed the tax on tea down to 12.5%, the 0.5% being the tax paid on entry, the customs duty, if you like. This has meant that the government has a £600,000 deficit to make up, and so it's come up with a new type of tax. Window tax. I know. It has given rise to the everlasting question, what actually constitutes a window? And it has brought things to a head. There is now something far more dangerous than expense on tea. It is something called adulteration. Adulteration is something that is done to the tea leaves to make them go further. For example, adding leaves of other plants in there or reusing used tea leaves. I know it's not exactly a crime, but it really is not a very tasty thing at all. And I know that servants, probably my own, are selling used tea leaves out of the back door for exorbitant prices. Even in Amsterdam, people are walking around with wheelbarrows full of used tea leaves. I suppose there may be some life left in them, but I can't really begin to imagine what that must taste like. But there's something far more hazardous going on, and that is adding chemicals to tea to make them the right colour. Copper carbonate is added to green tea to make it the right shade of green, and lead chromate to black tea. It's really terrible. These are the kind of chemicals that are used in tanning and dyeing and ink, and they're putting them into tea. It is said that the tea dealer is a would-be assassin ready to enter any man's home. You really have to be careful if you get a new dealer. A man who lives just up the road here did in fact employ a new tea dealer quite recently, and somewhat nervous about the tea he was going to get, he made a cup, but instead of drinking it himself, he gave it to his dog. Well, the dog was dead within an hour, and funnily enough, we've not seen that tea dealer in these parts since. But you're going to be thinking that tea drinking is all doom and gloom, and I've yet to regale you with tales of cakes and scones and gossip. For we ladies, thank goodness, are now allowed to drink tea in specially established tea houses. We even pay our waiters in tips to ensure prompt service. And there we may sit with our girlfriends and talk and gossip. But it's not just the tea houses. No, we can go shopping. Milliners and dressmakers will serve a cup of tea to a lady of high social standing. And then, of course, there's the benefits of tea on one's health. There is, however, one gentleman observer who says that since women have started drinking tea in this country, there's not nearly so much beauty in the land. He says that women now suffer from weak digestion and lassitudes, all of which could be cured, he says, by the leaving off of drinking tea. He also says drinking this liquid fire whilst breastfeeding can cause harm to the mother and infant. There are those on the other side of the spectrum, though, those who think tea can cure anything: blindness, deafness, infertility, scurvy, inflammation. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But I must say I firmly believe that tea can lift the spirits and raise yourself in a way that no other liquid can. All this talk of tea has made me somewhat thirsty, but before I make a cup, I must tell you that tea drinking has been attributed with the growth of our cities. You see, up until now, water has been full of disease and foul sewage, but tea requires freshly boiled water, and all of a sudden the poor can live together cheek by jowl without getting ill. That can't be a coincidence, can it? Of course, there are some believe that the poor shouldn't be drinking tea at all, that it makes them idle gossips and lazy. But I think those men are really more interested in their own profits than they are in the health of the poor. Making a cup of tea really is a joy, and ladies of social standing rather enjoy doing it for themselves. You see, we get our finest china out of the cupboard and we mix our tea leaves to suit our own palate. Today, I rather fancy a cup of green tea. So the first thing I must do is warm the teapot. This should, of course, be freshly boiled water. And once the teapot is warmed, this is all going to be done rather hastily, I'm afraid, the water is poured out into the spoiling dish. Oh, somebody hasn't cleaned my teapot properly. How disgusting. Then I unlock the caddy. Tea must be kept under lock and key. It is so expensive that I don't want the servants pilfering it. I could have done with a dry teaspoon, then that's the wrong caddy. Here we go. And then a spoonful of tea into the pot. One for me, one for the pot. And then freshly boiled water. I'm just pouring it over the spoon to give it a little rinse there. Now, I don't know about you, but I do rather like my tea to actually taste of tea. And I recommend a brewing time of some 5 minutes. I know, don't just wave your little tea leaves at some water there and hope everything's going to be all right. It won't be. Anyway, you can then add sugar if you want to. I know this doesn't look like what you were expecting, but white granulated sugar is quite new to us. And sugar comes from the tea plantations of Jamaica, and it is shipped like this. We can then grate it or hack it into lumps to add to our tea. Milk, of course, may be added afterwards to black tea. And then there's food, syllabubs, tea cakes, scones, cake, finger sandwiches. If it's a particularly cold day, we ladies can take our toasting forks and make crumpets by the fire. Now let us imagine, if you will, that 5 minutes is up, and it is time for me to pour my cup of tea. This, as I say, is green tea or gunpowder tea. The leaves unfurl to give off the most wonderful flavour. And so there you have it, a perfect cup of tea for the Regency lady. Whilst tea drinking in England dates back to 1662, the very British ritual of afternoon tea as a meal found its raison d'etre in the dressing room of Anna Maria Russell, one of Queen Victoria's ladies of the bedchamber and her lifelong friend. Now, Anna was always hungry. She was far too hungry to wait for dinner time, which in the summer can be served as late as 9:30 p.m. So she called for bread and butter, cakes and biscuits to be brought to her bedchamber for her to enjoy alongside her customary cup of Darjeeling tea. She invited her friends to her dressing room, and the Queen quickly learned of this activity, and she loved it. The Queen is a devotee of all things sweet. In fact, one of her favourite cakes is 2 layers of sponge with buttercream in between them and fresh raspberries. I do believe that this has become known as the Victoria sponge and is perfect to accompany a cup of tea. By now, the mid-19th century, women are gathering in their drawing rooms in their elegant gowns, gloves, beautiful hats, and afternoon tea has become quite a social affair. But by this time, it's no longer merely a ritual of indulgence for the upper class, however. It's also spread to the middle class, as tea is becoming much more affordable. Afternoon teas should not be confused with high tea or even a cream tea. Taken between 5 and 7 p.m, high tea is actually a meal. It consists of a hot entree, vegetables, baked goods, and tea to sustain the working classes after a long day's work. Cream tea is the lightest affair. It is usually a cup of tea with a scone, clotted cream and strawberry preserves. The addition of fresh strawberries turn it into a strawberry tea. As you can tell, we British like any form of tea. Now, afternoon tea is the happy medium, normally served between 3 and 5 p.m, and with it there are an assortment of refreshments. Cakes, biscuits, sandwiches and scones, of course with clotted cream and preserves. It is served from elegant silver teapots and fine bone china cups. Afternoon tea and cream tea have become quite the preserve of the lady, and they are served on lower tables so that we ladies can enjoy sitting in our parlours and be comfortable whilst enjoying our tea. Now, if one is lucky to be invited to tea with Queen Victoria, it's got me all of a flutter. One has to observe a few things. One should always be standing when the Queen enters the room. The teacup must be held daintily in the hand with not a single sign of a pinky finger to be seen, and the cup should always be placed delicately back onto the saucer when not being drunk from. And, perhaps the most important thing, as soon as the Queen stops eating, you too must take your last bite. During the Great War, tea is of vital importance, particularly on the front line, where soldiers are given a ration of tea. It comes in the form of something called a tea tabloid. This is a small compressed tablet of tea that can be placed into boiling water. A tin of such pellets, whatever their failings, the taste and strength must leave something to be desired, are really very good because they can be kept dry, they can be easily shipped and carried in a soldier's pack. Soldiers also have regular packets of tea provided. And yes, there is even milk in the trenches to go into the soldier's tea, although perhaps it's not the type of milk that you and I might choose. Evaporated milk, condensed milk, even milk tabloids. But as long as they have that, it is possible for a soldier to have milky tea or a cup of hot cocoa. Tea is a beacon of warmth, comfort, sustenance and a taste of home, which they must miss so very dreadfully. And of course, tea is very important here on the home front too. It's an essential comfort to those of us working to keep the country going. And canteens of Red Cross workers serve tea to wounded soldiers who arrive home from the front. Tea is of course served in all of the hospitals, and it forms a main part of the routine somewhere here, like a munitions factory. The Barnbane Munitions Factory in Leeds even had its own farm where there are cows, and the cows provide milk, and the milk goes into the tea. In the Second World War, one story above all others shows the importance of tea drinking in Britain and how embedded it had become in our country's morale. In 1942, the British government bought tea in vast amounts from every single country in the world. They tried to obtain every single pound of it, with the exception of Japan. In fact, the largest government purchases in 1942 were, in order of weight, bullets, tea, artillery shells, bombs and explosives. Even the German High Command understood the importance of tea on British morale and how disrupted the tea chain could become and how that would affect us so very greatly. So much so that when they undertook their sustained bombing raids on London, otherwise known as the Blitz, one of their targets time and time again was Mincing Lane, otherwise known as the Street of Tea. Now, this had been the centre of tea and spice commerce since the 19th century. Of course, tea is rationed. We are only allowed 2 ounces per week, which is the equivalent to 3 cups a day. That is, if you don't reuse your tea leaves, which, of course, we all feel that we must. But tea has remained a vital part of British life. It's drunk in the air raid shelters and the underground railway stations, dissolved from the NAFI and WVS fans. Of course, it is so terribly important when one has received bad news. A hot, sweet cup of tea is given to anyone in that situation. And Mr. Churchill has said that tea is the most important thing, more so than ammunition, because tea brings a semblance of tranquility and calm to this otherwise chaotic and turbulent world of the home front. But it's not just at home. Mr. Churchill has said that tea is so important to morale that any sailor on board a warship must be given an unlimited supply. And tea also forms part of a soldier's composite rations. It is known as compo tea. It comes in a tin and is already pre-made with sugar and milk. The food components of compo are best summarised as somewhat strange, with no further comment needed. The tea is basic and bulk shipped. Now, there are constant rumours that bromide has been added to the soldiers' tea to stop their gentlemanly urges. I think it gives a sense of what it tasted like. Anyway, soldiers reported that when it was hot, it was more than welcome and pleasant, but it soon took on the appearance of an unskimmed pool when it was lukewarm. The morale-boosting value of tea led to 75,000 tea bombs being dropped by the RAF on the occupied Netherlands. Each bag or bomb contained 1 ounce of tea from the Dutch East India Company with the message, "The Netherlands will rise again. Chins up." And every one of the 20 million Red Cross parcels that had been sent to British prisoners of war contained at least a quarter package of tea, a quarter of a pound in a package of tea from Twinings. Well, did you know that Mr. Twinings has been around for hundreds of years? He started working for the trading company in 1749 and became director of the East India Trading Company in 1793. So Twinings have been a major force for some 200 years. Oh, tea. Beautiful, hot, strong tea. The drink that is kept and will keep our nation going through thick and thin. I bet you're dying for a brew, aren't you? I certainly know that I am. So, raise your teapots and pour yourself a cup. And when you are done, let us raise a cup and toast tea, which amuses the evening, solaces the midnight, and welcomes the morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great British Cup of Tea. Oh, thank goodness all that's done. Time for a cup of tea, I reckon. What the devil's that supposed to be? Never seen anything like it. It's like the sweeping from the plantation floor. Oh, no. That'll never do. I'll have to make a proper brew.